Have you tested out the new Rubrik Security Cloud PowerShell SDK yet? Wondering why those GraphQL commandlets don't seem to be returning all the fields that you're used to getting with our REST calls? Now, while it may not seem like it to you right now, this is actually a feature of GraphQL. Confusing, I know, but sit back, relax, let me break it down for you. Welcome back, everybody, to this Rubrik Security Cloud PowerShell SDK video series. I'm Mike Preston, Technical Marketing Architect here at Rubrik, and today we're going to roll up our sleeves, get our hands dirty, and start exploring the commandlets within the RSC PowerShell SDK. In our last video, we walked through how to get the module installed and the various methods to authenticate to RSC. Today, we're going to execute some commandlets and begin getting some data back from our RSC platform. Now, if you've jumped ahead and already run some commandlets, say get RSC VMware VM, you might be wondering where exactly all the data is. Well, it's there, we just don't pull it by default. Now, I know, this isn't what you're used to, especially if you're an avid user of our older SDK for Rubrik CDM, which seemed to return way too much information. Now, this is actually a benefit of GraphQL. Rather than returning every single attribute known to the world around a certain object, GraphQL allows you to specify the exact fields that you're looking to retrieve, and only those fields are returned. The new RSC PowerShell module is built around these GraphQL benefits. To help, let's quickly take a look at the architecture of the SDK, as it's vitally important in order to leverage it to its full potential. So first, we have our RSC instance, and here lies all the GraphQL queries and mutations that we consume to do the various different Rubrik-related tasks. Outside of this lives all our clients that consume that GraphQL API. For instance, the UI could technically be a client. Same with, say, an integration to ServiceNow, and of course, the PowerShell SDK. Now, the RSC PowerShell SDK is broken down into two main categories of commandlets. First, we have something called our core commandlets. These core commandlets are auto-generated from the GraphQL schema and are a direct mapping to those queries and mutations that sit within the GraphQL server. So we have core commandlets that do things like generate GraphQL queries for us, and of course, invoke those queries for us, as well as they handle things like pagination and a whole bunch of other technical stuff that we don't really need to worry about. Now, the point is, the core commandlets are auto-generated during the SDK build. This is super important in terms of functionality and coverage for the SDK itself. Meaning, when our API teams implement new GQL queries and mutations within RSC, the SDK automatically generates the ability to consume these queries using the core commandlets. No more waiting for Rubrik engineers to handcraft commandlets around new features. Furthermore, the core commandlets enable you to take advantage of GraphQL benefits and avoid overfetching by allowing customers to specify the exact fields they want to be returned. Now, the core commandlets do have some drawbacks as well. For instance, you, the customer, will really need to understand a little bit about GraphQL and how it works in order to correctly leverage those core commandlets. For instance, you need to know how to discover things like query names and all the respected fields that are available within those queries. For instance, if I was looking to, say, get the ID, name, and data store location of a VM with the core commandlets, the code would look something like this. Again, very, very powerful, but a bit of a learning curve for sure. Now, this is why we also have something called wrapper commandlets. The wrapper commandlets are handcrafted by our Rubrik engineers and aim to abstract away even more requirements of having to really understand GraphQL. For instance, the wrapper commandlet to retrieve a VM will automatically return fields for us, things like ID, name, SLA domain, basically the information that 90% of our customers are looking for. If a wrapper commandlet doesn't exist, or it's not returning the information you need, then you must leverage the core commandlets to gather that information. With that, most times it's easier just to see it, so let's jump into VS Code and run through a use case. For today's example, let's simply retrieve some information around one of my virtual machines that Rubrik is protecting. Alright, so let's start with the wrapper commandlet. To retrieve a list of VMs that Rubrik has inventoried, we can simply run the get-rsc VMware VM commandlet. And then let's use the -name parameter and we'll pass in the name of my VM. Now, we can see here that the SDK has returned a couple of objects that match our name. And within those objects, we can see various attributes like their name, their ID, their power status, and a number of other fields. 90% of the time, these return fields from this wrapper commandlet will be more than enough for you to continue building your script. We've returned the most common fields by default. However, let's say for instance, we're also looking for the protection date property. Maybe we're generating a report that displays all the VMs and the date they were protected by Rubrik. We could see that the attribute is actually null within our response. So to retrieve fields or attributes that aren't returned by default in the wrapper commandlets, we need to utilize the core commandlets. Now, running core commandlets can really be broken down into two distinct steps. First, we need to generate our GraphQL query using the new RSC query commandlets. Then we take that query and execute it by simply sending it to invoke-rsc. All right, so step one, generating our GraphQL query. The commandlets used to generate these queries in the SDK all start with new-rsc query. And if we tab complete here, we can see that they are all broken down into specific categories. So if you're looking to generate a query around, say, Microsoft SQL, we'd use this MS SQL one. Maybe we're looking to automate AWS Cloud Native Protection, we'll use the new-rsc query AWS native commandlet. These are the core commandlets that are auto-generated using RSC's GraphQL schema. So we're playing with vSphere VMs here, so we'll use the new-rsc query vSphere VM. Now, for each of these commandlets, we need to pass in what's called an operation parameter. Again, if we tab complete, we can see our options. Now, these operation options map back to the actual GraphQL query name that we want to run. So in order to utilize these core commandlets, you should know the GraphQL query that you'd like to execute. In this case, I know it's going to be the new list one, so I'm going to go ahead and input that, but you can find this information out in a number of ways. You can look at the API docs, you can play with the API playground within RSC, you could use developer tools in Chrome to capture the API calls from the UI, and you can even use the get-rsc commandlet within the SDK, which will give you some pointers on how to map those query names to operations. Again, we have a whole series about GraphQL and Rubrik. Definitely check that out if you need some help getting started. So by default, if we were to run this commandlet as is right now, it will return the same GraphQL query that get-rsc VMware VM utilizes. But remember, we want to add that protection date field to our query. So to do this, we're going to use the -add field parameter, and then we can simply provide a list of the additional fields. This parameter is tab delimited, so if you don't know the exact field name that you're looking for, hitting tab will provide you with a bit of guidance in determining what is possible. That said, as you can see, there's, just a few of them. Now, GraphQL fields mostly are defined within the nodes object. So let's start with adding nodes, and then I'll add a dot, and then I'll start typing out protection date here, and I can tab complete. So don't get overwhelmed. Use tab completion. It's your friend in this case. So we have our protection date field added, and it's now stored within that VM query variable. We can actually take a look at this object and into the fields and then the nodes objects, and we can see all those fields listed once again. Now, any field here that's populated, doesn't matter what it's with, it'll be retrieved when we actually run this query. Any fields that are empty will simply be ignored. So now that we have our query, let's get into the actual fun part. Let's execute this bad boy. In order to do this, we just simply pass the VM query object into the invoke RSC commandlet. So we'll run invoke RSC VM query, and we're going to store this in our response variable. If we take a look at the response, we can see that we do indeed have the date protected field now populated. So that's it really for this video. I hope you now have a good understanding of just how Rubrik Security Cloud PowerShell SDK is architected. If you take away just one thing from this series, just remember that the wrapper commandlets are handcrafted, more PowerShell-esque, and just simple to use. The core commandlets act more as a base functionality for the SDK and can be utilized in place of the wrapper commandlets in order to add more functionality, retrieve more fields, or simply consume a GraphQL operation that our engineers haven't created a wrapper commandlet for as of yet. Again, any questions, feel free to comment below. Next in this series, we're going to start diving into some common use cases and how to accomplish these using the SDK. So be sure to subscribe or follow so you're notified when the next video is released. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you soon.